You're listening to the Real Christian Manliness podcast with Isaac and Tim Ingram. Let's get manly!
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in podcast land. Today's a good day, and today we have with me on the podcast my brother-in-law, Clayton Marxer. For some reason, and I'm sure it's a good reason, my brother is not on the podcast today, but he's a busy man, so we'll give him a break on that. But Clayton, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Isaac, how are you?
I'm doing great. I couldn't be, well, I could be better, but I could be a whole lot worse. So right there in the middle somewhere.
That's a good place to be.
Yep. So Clayton, most people don't know you that are on the podcast. I'm assuming. If there's anybody out there that actually knows Clayton, go ahead and comment on Facebook or something like that and tell us. But Clayton, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners? Let them know who you are and where you come from.
All right. Well, my name's Clayton Marxer. I am Isaac's brother-in-law. He married my little sister, and I didn't want to kill him the first time he called and talked to me. So he's a good dude. No, I was born and raised on a really big ranch here in Montana, in this area actually. When we all left the ranch, it was about 325,000 acres. We ran 7,000 mama cows, and I'd been over every mile of that place horseback. And I'd started riding at a very young age because we didn't have a babysitter. So Mom just put a pillow on her saddle in front of the horse, or in front of her on the saddle, and that's how I started riding. But then when my sister Christy came along, they had to do something else. So they gave me a Shetland pony, and so at the age of 2, I was riding by myself and covered a lot of country, spent a lot of time with my dad and my mom. And, you know, over the years, I had a very unique childhood, and I didn't appreciate it till I left. I thought it was normal for families to go out on a weekend and look for arrowheads and buffalo skulls, and it wasn't until after I left home that I realized just how unique my upbringing was. We were raised in church. I went to a Christian school. It was part of our church. We used the accelerated Christian education curriculum. When I got into high school, we homeschooled, and I worked full-time for one of the neighboring ranchers, and I would do schoolwork at night. It's kind of how my childhood went. And then I went to college in Wyoming, and after that I spent some time in Texas and Wyoming a couple times, Idaho a couple times, and mainly just doing ranch work. And I've done a lot of things since. I've sold cars, I've worked on cars, I was a drill instructor at Montana National Guard Youth Challenge, just like Isaac, and let's see, done a few different things. I work for the federal government now, in natural resources. I was working for the Forest Service, but when we had the opportunity to move back to Montana, I transferred over to a different agency, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And I spend my days helping people help the land. And that's our motto.
Nice. Yeah, that's definitely a unique upbringing in general. There's not a lot of people that have that type of upbringing, so that's pretty awesome. And also, some of our interviews have been homeschooled through accelerated Christian education. My brother and myself went through that, and I know of a couple others. I think John Epley, he's a bass singer, and Seth Weil, I believe, was a ACE guy. So that's pretty cool. So explain, and I don't completely understand this right now, but what can you explain a little bit about what you do now with your natural resources work?
Yeah. So in the 1930s, there was a period of time in America known as the Dust Bowl, and the Dust Bowl was caused by farming, basically. And what had happened was there was a huge market for wheat, right? So that was the way to get successful quick, is you get out west, you get some land, and you start farming it for wheat. And these people would, without knowing any better, they'd just tear up the ground and plow all this virgin soil up and then start farming it. Well, wheat's an annual crop, so it grows and then it dies, and then you have to do something with the ground so you don't leave it bare. But in those days they didn't, and they had dust storms that would come up and pick up that soil that it was loose and didn't have any organic matter in it because it had been turned over so much, and it would just pick it up and sail it away. And I mean, it would cover states before it hit the ground again. And it was really devastating to America. And I'm trying to figure out how much detail to go into. Anyhow, in the 30s, they put together what was called the Soil Conservation Service, and that was an agency dedicated to just helping farmers find better ways to till the ground, provide food for the American people, but actually take care of the ground rather than just killing it. And that's kind of where it all started. And we still do the same stuff today, only we do a lot more stuff too.
Yep. So is the basis of doing that, I guess in the simplest thing, is just kind of rotating your crops and having a plan as far as not just overdoing it in one area. You have to have a more balanced approach of how you grow things.
Yeah, I mean, you rotate your crops. Of course, irrigation becomes a big component of it. I spend a lot of my time engineering irrigation systems. They used to use a lot of flood irrigation because that's what they had. And now we have lots of center pivots and wheel lines and all sorts of cool stuff that uses water more efficiently. But yeah, like you were talking about, crop rotation, growing different kinds of crops that are actually just to help the land, like cover crops. So a cover crop, let's say a guy goes in and he grows a crop of grain or whatever, and then he's going to take that off his field, and he doesn't want to leave the ground bare, so he'll seed a cover crop into that field. And the cover crop will be stuff like the radishes or turnips, something that is going to leave a lot of organic matter back in the soil. And then when they're not raising the grain on it, they have organic material going back into the soil via decaying plant matter from those tubers.
Cool.
So then there's a lot of other crops that go into it too, but.
So whenever they plant a cover crop, that's not meant to be harvested. It's just meant to sit there, and then they just till it under, or
yeah. The purpose is to cover the soil so you don't have any bare soil, because bare soil either washes away or gets blown away. But cover crops can be harvested. Around here, what we are normally seeing is guys will put in a cover crop and then they'll graze the cover crop with cows. And then you also have organic matter being put onto the field via cow manure.
That's pretty interesting. There's a lot of things that I have learned and have been introduced to being up here for the last year that I would have never thought of. Whenever we went to North Dakota back in the summer, just with a doctor of geology, and we had a lot of conversations about the efficiencies of flood irrigation and wheel lines and pivots and all these different things, and he was talking to me about how efficient some of these things are, and if you use them too much, you can completely destroy a river or something like that, and totally lower the water table and things and things like that. And I just figured water was unlimited in a river,
It's not, and that's why, like in this part of the country, water's gold.
Yep.
And it's going to continue to become even more valuable as time goes on. And it's interesting for me too. I enjoy having you here because I'm used to this country. This is where I grew up, and our culture and what we do is normal to me. It's not normal to you. And seeing the light bulb come on when you're learning about how America's food is produced, I love that. And it helps me kind of have a good perspective, whenever we've been talking and you ask a question, and I think, wow, that's just second nature to me. It's interesting that that's what he would pick up on, is that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I shouldn't take that for granted. So yeah, it's awesome having you here, and awesome that, because you're going to be able to pass on this knowledge to Billy Sue or friends, family that I'm never going to be connected to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember one time I was talking to your dad, my father-in-law, for those of you who don't make that connection. I was saying, I feel like, especially urban and inner city schools and stuff, like it should be mandatory that they spend like a summer in some type of an agricultural setting, whether it's farmers or ranchers or something along those lines, because food doesn't come from McDonald's or Walmart,
Yep. Yeah.
Oh man. So, and some people this topic might be a little bit boring, but I mean, it's something pretty cool. It's not something I necessarily want to spend my life making a living doing, but it's just something interesting. So,
Mm-hmm.
So
2% of the population raises food for the other 98%.
Nice. Talk about the 1%, the 1%ers, the 2%ers.
Yeah.
So Clayton, let's move on to something a little bit different. One of the first things that I found out about you after we talked that first time was your YouTube channel. So tell the folks a little bit about the YouTube channel, where it came from, and kind of what the whole meaning behind that is.
Okay. Yeah. So some of you may recognize this. I have a YouTube channel and a bunch of other social media, and it's called The Adventure Cowboy. And where that comes from is, years ago I was guiding hunters, and I had one guy in particular that we were up on top of a mountain around 9,000 feet, and there was a blizzard kind of blowing in, and we were just kind of sitting around a fire trying to stay warm and waiting for the time when the elk would be more active and moving again, and just watching to see if we could spot one out in the blizzard. And as we were sitting there, as will happen when you're guiding hunters, you get to visiting and talking about things. And it's amazing how you'll open up to somebody that you've never met before and you're never going to see again. And this was one of those moments. And this gentleman, after we'd talked for quite a while, he basically just said, "Clayton, I'm going to tell you something that's probably going to tick you off, and I don't mean it to, but you have a unique background. You have a unique outlook on life, and you're positive, and you have an amazing story that you don't share with anybody. Shame on you." And at first, when he said the shame on you part, I kind of was I got a little defensive. I was like, who is this dude? He doesn't know me. He's not been around me, but he was just, what he was an older gentleman who was very successful and very wise. And he knew, I was just living in Clayton land, and I'm social, but I wasn't really trying to tell a story to anybody. And so after he'd left, and I don't even remember his name, that's the sad part. After he'd left, I thought about it a lot, and I decided that, this guy's right. I didn't really know where to start. The only thing I could think of was to get a camera and start using it. My mom's a photographer, so I know that her pictures spoke to a lot of people. So I got a camera, started taking photographs and video, because I know I like to watch videos on YouTube and stuff. I didn't really know what to do with the videos, so I created it. I was trying to create a YouTube account. And back then, you didn't use your name in YouTube. You had to have some sort of, I forget what they call it, avatar, some other nickname. So I'd put in what I thought was cool, and YouTube would come back and say, "Nope, already taken. Here's 5 other choices." And after about 5 times of me trying to do my own thing, one of the choices that YouTube gave was The Adventure Cowboy.
Nice.
And I thought, I can go with that. I spent a lot of time in the mountains hunting, and adventure's pretty important to me, so I'll go with it. And that's kind of where it all got started. And my YouTube channel, yeah, there's gun stuff, there's hunting stuff, there's family stuff. It's more kind of like a vlog of my life. I resisted the temptation to just do a themed YouTube channel, and mainly because I wasn't really worried about growing into a huge follower base. I just wanted to have the videos somewhere, and the main motivation was so that someday if something happens to me or when I'm gone, my kids or my grandkids can maybe get to know Dad a little bit better by watching his videos. And there's been a lot of people that have been inspired, or they've sent me awesome messages after watching my videos, and it's really kept me going with it. And that's kind of how I got started.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, and those that haven't checked your YouTube channel out, I suggest you go do that. There's a lot of really cool stuff out there. My nephew Braxton is in a few of them, and how Clayton's teaching him how to track and how to be in the outdoors and do things like that. And even though he's 5 or 6 in those videos, if you're an adult like me and don't know how to be in the outdoors, that's a good starting point. You got to start somewhere.
Well, yeah, that's funny because that video that you're talking about, I made a little series on my YouTube channel called The Wild Child, and it's basically just my son. And we were up bow hunting, and he was 5, and we were walking out, and I was just asking him about survival stuff that we had been talking about every time we're outside. And as we're walking along, I just started quizzing him, and I had the camera on him, and he gets kind of nervous, but he did good. And as we were walking along, I said, "Okay, Braxton, so how long can you live without water?" 3 days. How long can you live without food? 3 weeks. Boy, and he just snapped back with the answers quick. And everything that he says in that video will keep an adult alive if they just understand those basic concepts.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not just hunting, which I'm sure you get a lot of people that are just attracted by the hunting, because that's a very masculine thing to do. But it's just about survival. It's about wholesome topics, taking care of yourself, taking care of the land, which is interesting because that's what you do now. Is you work in a field where you're taking care of the land and you're stewarding the land.
And most of my life I've been doing that, but when I was ranching, I was in the private sector. Now I'm in the federal sector. And when I went to work for the government, coming from a very conservative ranching culture, boy, it initially felt like I was going to work for the enemy. But at that point in time, it was just because I didn't have any other choice. In Leadore, Idaho, where we were, that was the only place hiring. And after I got started in it, I realized that I was in a unique spot. I was a ranch kid, born and bred, very conservative. And I'm out here on these allotments with these ranchers, kind of telling them how they're going to graze and when they're going to graze. And that's kind of a position that all the ranchers kind of generally hate that person, okay?
Yeah.
But
the government
I was in a unique position, being you got the government on one side and you got the ranchers on the other side who feel like the government's oppressing them, and I was able to be in between and kind of bridge a gap, and I was able to communicate quite effectively between both sides. And it was good for me to actually go to work for the government, because now I understand a lot of the stuff that I used to be kind of, bitter or talk bad about the government. I don't do anymore, because there's a lot more to it than 90% of the population realizes.
Yeah.
And it's a thankless job.
Yeah, and I think you and I have talked about it a little bit. Just it from a conservative, small government perspective, it's an interesting thought to think that the government agency is doing some good. And and it's a shame that the government has to do that. You wish that businesses and farmers and ranchers and corporations could just have stewardship in mind and not just the quick buck, and I don't know if I know whenever we were talking last time about this, I was thinking about this. A lot of companies have that quick buck outlook, but that's really not the best thing, because you want to be able to have the same business and the same income for 10 years, 20 years, 100 years. And you only do that through stewardship and managing in a way that you can do that for hundreds of years.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm a free market capitalist, and I have no problem saying that. But I also am man enough to admit that there are drawbacks to everything. And a drawback to a free market capitalistic system is that those who don't have a good view towards the future, they're not really thinking ahead, are thinking about cash flow. So they're going to get everything they can right then. They're thinking about that year's balance sheet. They're not thinking about 10 years from now, what are their kids going to have? And so that's kind of where these agencies got their start. And without some sort of regulation, not everybody, but there's a lot of producers that will take absolutely everything they can, and with no real regard towards what our grandkids are going to have.
Yeah, exactly. And that's true in a lot of ways. You got to have, not just in a producer agriculture type situation, but in a lot of ways you've got to have a long distance game in mind as a man and as a human being. You can't just live for today. You gotta have both a short game and a long game, so to speak. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Spreezabox. Spreezabox is a subscription box that gives you effortless style for about $28 a month. Each month you'll get a box that helps keep you dapper with ties, socks, sunglasses, grooming products, and other high-quality accessories, which total every month over $100 in each box. Each month you'll get 5 to 6 items that are hand-picked by a personal stylist. And if you're like me and you like to wear a suit and tie to church, this is a great way to add a splash of color to your wardrobe. Update your look and support our show by going to Spreezabox.com, and when you check out, use the coupon code Ingram10 for 10% off your subscription. That's Ingram10 when you check out at Spreezabox.com. So let's transition a little bit to kind of more philosophical, I guess, manliness, manliness type things. What is in your background and in your upbringing, what is your definition of a good Christian man?
Number one is the Christian part. You can't be a good Christian man if you're not a genuine born-again Christian. If you've never been in a place where you were man enough to admit that you weren't good enough to get to heaven on your own, then you're not going to be a good Christian man. But once the Christian's taken care of, there's a number of things I think that go into being a good man. And I'm going to preface this by saying I went through a period of my life where I wasn't being a good man. And a lot of things happened negatively in response to that. So I got a few things that I'm going to say that hopefully they don't rub anybody the wrong way, but they've been my observation. Number one, a man has to be courageous, has to be willing to put themselves on the line. They have to be driven. They need to be able to see something that they want and go for it. See something that's right and go do it. They need to be confident. Nobody will follow a man who isn't confident. So you can't lead from a Christian perspective or any other perspective if you're not a confident person. And you get confidence by having skills, by having done things. once you've done them and you understand them, you get more confident. And so that goes into the next thing is you need to have skills. If you're going to be an actual man, you need to have skills. And I'm not saying everybody needs to be able to go build their own house, but you should have basic skills if you're a man. You should be able to feed your family. You should be able to build shelter. You should be able to clothe. And I know that sounds kind of silly given in a culture where we can just go to Walmart and buy everything, but the raw skill that it takes just to survive, if that's what the situation you were put in, could you provide for your family in a survival situation? If the electric grid went down, could you do it? And if you can't, then that's something manly that you need to start working on. You need to be a leader. A real Christian man, I think, needs to be a leader. And maybe they don't need to be up leading the singing. They don't need to be necessarily pastoring a church or being the boss at their job, but they need to be able to lead at a minimum their family. They need to be able to lead their family spiritually and be the leader in their family in daily life. They need to have answers. If the wife or the kids have questions, the dads need to be able to have truthful answers, not just make up stuff to give them an answer. And they need to be man enough that if they don't know the answer, they say, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. The other couple things, there's a big difference between purpose and passion. And a real Christian man, in my opinion, is a man of purpose. And I went through a stage in my life where, I guess I'm going to be man enough here to be real open on this and expose myself a little bit. Several years ago, after having been married for 7 years, things went south really quick. I mean, my marriage ultimately ended. And in the period of time after the divorce when, I was just trying to figure out how am I going to move forward? I was trying to put my life back together. And I never lost my faith in God. But it doesn't matter how much faith in God you have when you go through a situation like that, a divorce that you didn't want, with kids involved, it will destroy you. But I'm thankful for it because it put me in a place where I really had to reflect on what it is that I'm here for. What does God want me to do? And it's not a bad thing to say, what do I want to do? What are some things that I want to do in my life? Because what had happened was I went into marriage very confident. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I was good at what I did. At some point along the way, I got to where I lost my confidence. I hated fighting. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want my wife at the time to ever be mad at me. And I got to where I didn't want confrontation with her. So I kind of humbled myself to a point where I didn't have any confidence left. And it's hard for a wife to respect a man who isn't confident. In fact, they're not going to long term. And I will say that, and I know what I'm talking about because I went through it. And that I never was able to turn it around. Now, I'm not going to put all the blame just on myself. It takes two people to end marriage. But that was the large contributing factor to that. After we got divorced, we were separated at the time. The divorce hadn't gone through, but I was moving out. And my best friend, who's been with me ever since I was a kid, he was helping me unload some stuff into an apartment that I had. And he asked me while we were unloading, he said, "Clayton, why are we unloading furniture?" And he had no idea what was going on. And I broke down. And I told him what was going on, and I told him, I don't know what to do. I said, if I thought about it, I don't really have any goals. Like, what do I want to do this year? What do I want to do? I don't even know one thing that is a goal for me right now. And he stopped me and he said, "Clayton, I'm going to tell you right now, that is not the best friend that I grew up with. That's never been you. You were always very driven, very goal-oriented. And at some point, you have let all that go. And that was kind of a big slap in the face. Nobody just pointed it out like that. You're going through that, people like to sympathize with you and say, oh, well, you'll be okay. You don't need her, or everything will be fine. But he called me out on it. And post-divorce, after that, when I was putting my life back together, I learned some things about myself. And one of the things I learned was purpose. If a man doesn't have something that is his purpose that he's driving to, he's not going to be able to hold the respect of his wife. This is kind of hard to talk about, but it's good. My purpose had gone from ranching, which was my purpose. I wanted to be a ranch manager. That was my goal. That was everything I wanted when I was younger and early married. My purpose had shifted, and I'd let it shift from being a ranch manager to just trying to keep her happy. And it is impossible for one human to make another human happy. And I didn't know that at the time. I didn't get that. I thought I could. So when my purpose shifted from what I was after, what the path that God had put me on, to just trying to make somebody else happy, I set myself up for failure. And that's what happened. After the divorce, I figured that out and started writing stuff down. What is it that I want? And there's a difference between a purpose and a passion. A passion is something that you love to do, like hunting. Hunting for me is a passion. I love to do hunting stuff. But hunting has never been a purpose that God's put in front of me, that's my purpose for being here. And a lot of people get those kind of confused. Passions usually stay the same from when you're a kid to when you get older. Purposes can change from what God wants you to do to the next thing God wants you to do. So you're trying to figure everything out after this gut-wrenching, heartbreaking divorce. I remembered something another client had told me years ago. We were talking about goals and things that we wanted to do. And he said, well, did you write it down? And I said, well, no. And he said, well, then it's just a wish. And I asked him, I said, what do you mean? He's like, a goal that's not written down is just a wish. And wishes don't come true. Goals come true because you've written them down and you have a plan to make them happen. And whoa, truth bomb. So I remembered that when I was going through that hard time. And I honestly feel like God put that on my heart to kind of help me find my way forward again. And I wrote some things down that I wanted to do, and within a year I was checking them off the list. And a couple of years later, God brought Cody into my life, my wife, and I'm happier than I've ever been in my entire life. Going through that divorce, I was still faithful to God, but I did not know how I would ever come out of it. And I didn't even fathom what true happiness was, because I had never had happiness like this before. Mm-hmm. So I'm blessed beyond measure. And in our Western cowboy culture, when things like that happen in a person's life, the tendency isn't to go to church more. There's as many bars in every one of these towns as there is churches. And there's even a lot of self-professing Christian men that when things happen like that, they end up going to the bar. And I knew better. But I'm thankful that I had a good church and a good pastor and godly men in my life like my dad to help me get through that.
Definitely.
That was a long-winded thing about me, but there's some important stuff in there.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I'm sitting here listening to you, and there's just a bunch of things that you checked off the list as far as, in my opinion, what's important to be a man. I think the confidence is crucial. The purpose is crucial. Being man enough to say I don't know. I think I don't know might be one of the manliest things that you could say. it's not very manly to lie and just, pull something out of certain places.
Yeah.
and and that's absolutely right. And I'm going to be a little bit candid too, not personally, but it might rub some people the wrong way. And you and I both know that we believe in the church, and the church is where God uses people, and God finds people and does His work. But I think a lot of men, a lot of husbands and fathers, they do way too much just to please the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean pleasing the Lord. I mean pleasing the men and women who are in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a real man to say, what you're doing is great and all. You're doing these things and they're good things, but my family's going to come before we do X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
And it's. I think if you get so involved in a church that your family is being sacrificed for it, then that is sinful. That is wrong. The family came before the church,
Mm-hmm.
and the church is there to build your family, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Your family's not there to build the church, and so. There's some people on here that might not like that, but that's what I've learned. I've seen so many people, so many men that weren't courageous enough, and they didn't stand enough for their family, that they lost their whole family over it, because they were all about the church, and in such a way that it's not about the church. It's about what other people think about them. It's about wanting to be holier than thou, or those type things.
Yeah. They take their ministry real seriously, but if they really reflected on why, I know there's a lot of people that are in different ministries within the church that they're doing it purely from, they feel that God's put it on their heart to do it. But I would say a large percentage of people that are super active in ministries within the churches, if they really reflected, there is a bit of a selfish, I'll call that pride.
Oh, yeah.
Not to say that stuff doesn't need to be done, and not to say that I'm great. I'm more, I guess, sinful in the way that I don't do enough in church, and I'll admit that. But on that topic, I'm very, very grateful because of who my dad is. My father was one who understood that a Christian man's first duty to lead are his family. You can't lead people in the church and neglect your family. That doesn't work that way. And if we all really thought about it, and I'm not talking about being judgmental, but really thought about people in our churches and our communities that we've known for their whole lives, and their kids, and how their kids turned out. How many super active, pillars of the church have kids that went off? Now,
Yeah.
We're all individuals. We all have free will.
Yeah.
That could happen to anybody. But in my experience of watching over the years, watching kids as they mature and go through high school and on to college, the ones that always end up coming back, it seems. They may leave for a while when they're younger, but they end up back in the church. Those kids had dads that were like doing stuff with them all the time. Those dads were always doing stuff with their kids. And I think there's a connection there. I think those kids respect their fathers and their leadership, and there's a bond there that they had a good Christian leader without having to sacrifice their father
Yep.
to a bunch of other people that may or may not actually be getting a blessing from them.
Yep. Well, we were probably getting close to about 10 minutes past what our typical podcasts go. So,
Sorry.
No, not at all. There's a lot of good stuff that we covered. I appreciate you. I appreciate, I definitely appreciate your family. I mean, I tell people all the time I couldn't have got a better set of in-laws and a better family to be married into, and your family's been so great to me, and it's just been fun, and I'm looking forward to getting out in the back country and the high country and filling a freezer full of deer or elk meat or something like that.
Well, that goes back to my skills thing.
Yeah.
So you're from the city. You're from an urban environment. Your food's always come from the grocery store. But now that you're out here out west with me, we've been out shooting the gun, getting you ready because you're gonna go get your own meat. You're gonna kill it. You're gonna clean it, and you're gonna grill it.
Oh, that sounds awesome. It sounds delicious. It doesn't get very much more manly than that, man. I tell you what.
Well, tell me that when we're packing it out.
I need to hit the gym more. All right. Well, Clayton, thanks for being on the show with us. How can the listeners find you and find your YouTube channel and all that stuff?
Well, it's pretty easy. If you Google The Adventure Cowboy, it's going to come up with my stuff. It's The Adventure Cowboy on Facebook, at The Adventure Cowboy on Instagram. I don't even pay attention to Twitter anymore. And then The Adventure Cowboy on YouTube. Those are my social media things. They can find me on Facebook just by my name, too.
Yep.
And I'm a pretty public guy. I don't hide stuff, and there may be stuff that you don't really like, but that's just who I am. I'm not going to post stuff just to make people happy.
There you go. Well, I'll go ahead and post some of those links in the show notes and on social media. And thanks for being on the show. It's been a great conversation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Real Christian Manliness podcast. We hope you enjoyed our show. Now, if you could do us a favor, go over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. That way other people can find us easily in the rankings. And if for some reason you don't think we deserve 5 stars, give us whatever you think we deserve, but please explain why we got that rating in a review. Now make sure you subscribe and have a great day.